something that I've noticed clinically, most people think that they might be eating enough calories, but after we dive deep into that, most women are actually under eating, and it might not be on purpose. It might not be due to like wanting to lose weight, but maybe just not having enough time to eat or not eating the foods that provide them with enough calories to produce those building blocks for hormones. And then on the other side of things, when we're talking about stress, if our stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, epinephrine are competing with our sex hormones, then it normally leads to quite an imbalance where we can end up with a number of different menstrual related symptoms, trouble conceiving, as well as early menopause or really tough menopausal symptoms to deal with.
Hello and welcome to Nourish. My name is Kasha and I'm a holistic counselor and first-year doctoral student studying acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. My mission with this podcast is to share the stories of inspiring humans who have discovered that elusive state of balance between the Western concept of success with more Eastern philosophies of inner knowing and spirituality. Think yin and yang in flow. Now, these two do not need to be separate, but I know firsthand how difficult it can be to reconcile them. As a Silicon Valley burnout SKP myself, teaser, I left the tech world after 10 years of a thriving career in product management. I want to share the stories that I wish I had heard when I was struggling to find that balance and flow myself. On this podcast, we'll cover topics on spirituality, authentic career and relationships, slow living, mindfulness, alternative healing, concepts from psychology, and stories of transformation via traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. We'll also provide you with the tools to truly integrate both sides of your yin and yang. My hope is that these interviews can inspire you to rethink your own approach to mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And if you are struggling, find your way back to authentic alignment. So, sit back, relax, and ground yourself back home, my love. Now let's get started. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to this week's episode of Nourish. We have such a juicy topic for you today. I spoke with acupuncturist, herbalist, skincare guru, entrepreneur, and healer Layne Bronson on the topic of Chinese medicine for skincare, for fertility, for digestive issues, and more. Layne is truly a guru of her craft. She was my personal acupuncturist and practitioner when I lived in Boulder last year. And we dove into a whole bunch of both technical and practical topics. So everything from digging into what is qi, how it works, how do emotions cause disease, and also tips and tricks for navigating situations where perhaps emotions are actually causing imbalances in our body. Layne gets personal. She talks about her own journey to discover Chinese medicine, her experience with pretty severe digestive issues as a child, and how that was deeply connected to a lot of unrelenting stress. We talk about how acupuncture works, how much time is required for acupuncture healing, and also we talk about, for all you boss babes, out there who are looking to really optimize your fertility, optimize your menstrual health, and your general kind of monthly well-being, we dig into what are some tangible ways that you can do that, which really apply to everyone because, of course, Chinese medicine is so deeply unique, but Layne speaks from her personal experience, her practice, what are some things that we can look at and really start to investigate today. So this is a juicy episode. If you care about skincare, digestion, fertility, if you want to know more about Chinese medicine, I truly encourage you to tune in. And without further ado, let's welcome Layne to the Nourish podcast. I just want to share some personal context around how excited I am to have you here, because I came to see you at the height of COVID when I was living in Boulder, when I really just started to explore the possibility of studying traditional Chinese medicine. And so it is just such an honor to be here with you right now, like when I'm actually in the process of studying Chinese medicine, and to be having this incredible conversation. So I just want to express, like, first and foremost, I'm so grateful to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here too, Kasha. Yeah, I was really honored when you reached out to me to have me on the podcast and to see that you were studying Chinese medicine and see how the influence of possibly, your treatments with me when you were in Boulder got you to where you are today. And it's very, very cool to see that from my side. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to chatting today with you.
And chat we will. We have so many questions, including some lots of requests from people, which is fantastic. But before we dive into all of that juicy stuff, I want to start with a question that I love to ask each and every person. And that is each and every person in general, but also guests on the podcast. What are 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
Yeah, so I thought about this one a little bit before the interview, and it did lead to like some introspection, which was a great little exercise to open me up. But I thought about 3 words. One is curious, generous, and maternal.
Ooh, that is a juicy one. I love that. I will admit that the maternal one is that's the first time I'm hearing that, and I love having you describe that, because I think it really hits home for how what my experience was when I was receiving treatments from you and when I was working with you, and I just love to hear you say that, because when you're in a podcast setting and you're somebody who's listening to this, you may not always really know who's on the other side, but that one is just such a good descriptor. So thank you for sharing that. All right. I want to kick it off with your own health journey, because I think that starting personal, especially since it is so related to how you chose to pursue and why you chose to pursue traditional Chinese medicine. You're a acupuncturist and herbalist. And so I would love to hear more about your own health journey and how it led you to discover Chinese medicine.
Yeah, exactly, Kasha. It definitely did lead me to discover traditional Chinese medicine in the first place. But it all started when I was really like around kind of puberty age, started to experience many GI symptoms, many gastro symptoms related to digestion, poor appetite, trouble with bowel movements, and just like major discomfort. Now, this also kind of showed up for me around the time that I was experiencing like intense psycho-emotional changes in my life. My parents were getting divorced. So, coming from a holistic perspective, knowing what I know now about how our emotions affect our digestion and affect our overall health, I'm like, oh, duh, that makes perfect sense. But back in the 90s, this wasn't necessarily fully accepted, especially in the medical community that, my family had brought me around, in terms of my pediatrician was really the only doctor I was seeing or medical specialist I was seeing, and they really couldn't make that connection. So I bounced around from a number of different specialists. I would uh, end up out of school for a number of days, traveling to like hospitals far and wide all over the state of Florida where I grew up. And they actually ended up putting me on antidepressants to address my gastroenterology symptoms. Yeah, I would never met with a psychiatrist. This was never related to my emotions necessarily. And I was super, super young. Um, that being said, it was successful. It helped for a number of years. And that really just goes to prove that connection, that this was related to my nervous system. This was related to being like overexcitable and being on stress hormones and running on those stress hormones instead of being a relaxed, happy-go-lucky kid as I should have been at that age. Um, Now, at that time when I was 16, I was really lucky because, or a few years later, when I was about 16 years old, my mother did bring me to a traditional Chinese medicine doctor, but she only brought me once. And, as an acupuncturist, I really do highlight the importance of being regular and having good frequency with acupuncture appointments. You definitely don't get amazing results from your first appointment, even though kids can sometimes respond pretty quickly. I did not respond right away, and we were like, oh, didn't work, not going back. So now knowing what I know about Chinese medicine, it's interesting. And I wish I had stuck it out and maybe gotten more from that experience. But it was a number of more years that I went on to just continue to have different GI symptoms. It would get better, it would get worse. We'd try different pharmaceuticals, different doctors, depending on where I was living at the time. And then it wasn't until college, really, when I moved to Boulder, actually, to go to CU Boulder, go Buffs. Um, and in Boulder, I kind of, my health hit a rock bottom. It was mainly related just to like being a normal college student, living the college life, eating poorly, staying up late, being stressed, drinking alcohol, just generally not taking good care of myself. But everyone else was doing the same thing. They didn't feel bad, but I felt really bad. So it was at that time that I decided to seek out acupuncture myself as an adult. And in doing so, I really was able to make so many different changes to not only like my lifestyle, but also my diet, my supplement routine, and just had a whole different outlook on how these different areas of my life were interrelated and how they were influencing my health and my symptoms.
I honestly feel like I should just call this podcast Diseases That My Emotions Have Caused Me because it's just so true. And I hear this story so frequently from people who reflect back on, just connecting the dots between their mind and their body. So I have so many questions for you, but I actually just want to start with this one because I think this will be interesting. And also, I think it might give some people insight into how the mind of a acupuncturist and Chinese medical professional works. Reflecting back on your younger self as an acupuncturist and a, kind of practitioner of Chinese medicine, imagine if you were your own case study. Like, what would you kind of reflect back was happening, right? Like, we know the Western diagnosis, but I would love to get insight into, and like everything so deeply now, like what was going on if you would kind of approach that from a Chinese medicine point of view.
Yeah, so from a Chinese medicine point of view, what I would see in a child who was going through like an intense emotional change, whether that be divorce, moving to a new state, assimilating into a new school, like major changes at pivotal points in time, really under the age of 14, when our brain is still in that major development stage and the emotional centers of our brain are in that major development stage. Basically, my brain was not able to catch up with these changes. So my nervous system was just in that fight or flight mode for an extended period of time. And we can look at this from a Chinese medicine perspective as my qi was not properly flowing. It wasn't harmonized in the body. Now, everyone will have kind of different areas where this can affect them. But for me, it's settled in my digestive organs. And really going forward, that created a weakness for me that I need to be mindful of for going forward for the rest of my life. So whenever I experience emotional upheaval or, intense periods of stress, I do feel it in my stomach still because of that initial weakness that was created during that time of development.
That was such a good explanation. And for folks who perhaps are not familiar with qi, how would you define what that is?
Yeah, so I always describe qi as the energy that supports our body, nourishes the different organs and organ systems in our body, and is necessary for providing all of our metabolic processes. So if we're not If our qi is not flowing properly, we're going to experience pain. We're going to experience possibly emotional stress, as well as internal diseases or dysfunction. So it's really important that we focus on a free flow of qi in the body, and we can do this from a number of different treatments and perspectives. We look at qi from an overall body perspective, making sure that it is, strong enough, but also flowing properly systemically. And then we also look at qi in a more specific organ system.
All right. First of all, thank you so much for that very easy to understand explanation. That was so helpful. I want to dive into a follow-up question. Now that we kind of have an understanding of qi, could you share with us, because this keeps coming up, how is it that emotions are directly connected or perhaps in some ways even causing disease?
So from a Chinese medicine perspective, really each of our organs in the body has an emotion that's associated with it. It's like the job of that organ to process that emotion. And a lot of the times when our emotions are super intense, they will jump up to role number one of that organ. So each of the organs has a number of functions that it has to do. Our heart has to beat to keep us alive. Our stomach has to digest food to move down into the large intestine and provide us energy. Our liver has to detoxify, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, they have so many biological jobs, but then they also, like I mentioned, have to process through each of the emotions that's associated with them. So when we're feeling intense emotions, that emotion will jump up and become number one job of that organ. So it'll be dealing with that emotion, and then all the other jobs will kind of get pushed to the side, doesn't get the same amount of attention, and sometimes doesn't get any attention. And then those processes will ultimately stop functioning or not be functioning at the optimum level. So we can get immediate symptoms that cause us, immediate discomfort or pain or, certain like dysfunctions of those organs. But in a long term, that can actually cause damage to those organ systems. That will prevent them from functioning at their optimum in, going forward and can really cause disease in the long term.
All right, that was such a good explanation. And I just want to echo that I can totally relate to that, whether it be like feeling horrible stomach issues if I'm eating while stressed, or even like feeling immediate like physiological symptoms when I'm super anxious and nervous, like before a big presentation or going on stage. So I just love how you were able to kind of translate that mind-body connection, and also how uniquely the patterns can be kind of identified throughout the body with the various organs. So, a question that I get frequently is what kinds of things does Chinese medicine treat? I know you see a whole variety of patients, so I would love for you to share, like, what are some of the things that and diseases or complaints that a lot of your patients are coming in with?
So acupuncture treats symptoms associated with basically every disease, syndrome, pattern, anything. So I love that question because people ask me that all the time. They'll say, can acupuncture treat fill in the blank? And my answer is always yes. I've seen it, I've treated it. And that doesn't mean that acupuncture is always the best modality for treating every single syndrome or pain pattern or symptom. However, it can be really effective when combined with other modalities. So main symptoms and patterns and things that I see with my patients, I specialize in gut health, as we talked about before. That kind of comes from my own personal background and knowledge from treating myself, from seeing so many specialists myself, and knowing what helps and what doesn't. Now, I know not all patients present the same way as I do, but that really is my passion. Um, other areas that I treat a lot of is fertility and pregnancy, as well as postpartum. So I really love helping patients become moms and become parents, and helping them achieve that major life goal. It's really, really fulfilling and something that has really filled me up in terms of my personal obligation to helping patients achieve their health goals. And then I would always say that almost all patients also come in with some sort of musculoskeletal pain or physical discomfort. Now, it's not always their first kind of main request that we want to work on, but everyone has like, some stress that they store in their shoulders, or a little low back pain from their office chair, or discomfort from maybe being super physically active. Here in Colorado, I treat a lot of athletes, triathletes, hikers, skiers. So always just helping people to stay in their best physical shape as well so that they can do the activities that they love.
Well, that's basically like a menu of everything, which is what I absolutely adore. And I can just attest that we went through like waves and cycles of, I came in with one thing, it, evolved, obviously improved. I was actually, complete transparency, coming in for stress and menstrual symptoms. And it was just incredible to see, the changes in my cycle and the changes in, my stress levels. I think that was honestly like one of the most amazing things. And I've definitely preached about this on prior podcasts, but I love the plethora of diseases and conditions that acupuncture and Chinese medicine really can support. Now, before I dive into some of the kind of menstrual health and fertility stuff, because I actually have some special requests from listeners, I did want to touch briefly on the concept of time. You mentioned that when you came in when you were younger, you came in for one session, and although some people do respond after one session, it does take more time. And I've always wondered this, and I can't believe I've never asked, but like, why is that the case? Because people might be wondering, like, hello, like I take Tylenol, it works, but can you share a little bit more about like what's happening behind the scenes that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so I wish that acupuncture could be just a one and done kind of instant gratification tool. But being an ancient medicine, this was developed 3,000 years ago. And this was before pharmaceuticals. So if we kind of shift our thinking and go back to that period of time, this probably was pretty instant gratification for those ancient Chinese that were developing this. They were like, wow, you just stick a needle and a few weeks later, I'm feeling better. But in our fast paced society now, it does seem rather slow. Okay, but that aside, what's happening in our bodies is it's a very gentle and gradual medicine. And I always remind my patients that it's basically cumulative as well. So in the first treatment, your body's getting a taste of this new pattern of how energy, how chi is circulating. For most patients, they see results in that first appointment, and it might last about 24 to 48 hours or so, and then going back to their normal symptoms shortly after that. After their second appointment, that'll continue to increase the amount of time that they experience relief from their symptoms. And that maybe that goes on to 3 days, 4 days, and then continuing and continuing. So as your body starts to learn those new mechanisms of moving the energy, it actually does it on its own. So the needles aren't doing anything. They're not adding anything to your system. They're not removing anything from your system. They're just redirecting the energy and chi in a way that your body already knows how to do. It's just gotten off track. And it can get off track for a number of different reasons. But I always talk about the top reasons being stress, trauma, whether that be emotional trauma or physical trauma, as well as injury and illness. So these are kind of like our main reasons why our energy can get off track. And it just sometimes needs a little gentle nudge to get back onto its roadmap that it already has. After a few treatments, that roadmap becomes more clear to the body. And then it starts to understand, oh, okay, I'm supposed to move my energy here. I remember this. I understand. And then we kind of are in that maintenance phase of treatment where we're just gently reminding the body maybe once a month or every few weeks, hey, this is where it goes.
That was so beautifully explained. Thank you. And, just kind of thinking back, like from my personal experience, it's like I did not get out of balance overnight. It was a cumulative thing. And so I would like, that's why it also just logically to me makes sense that kind of finding that balance again doesn't necessarily just happen immediately, right? But I loved the actual more technical explanation. Thank you. We got a question about acupuncture for hormone regulation, which is obviously what I came in for. And, knowing what I know, by the way, I'm obviously not the guru. I'm here learning. So that's why we're going to lean on Layne, not me. But I know that there can be a lot of different root causes for things like hormonal imbalances. But what, from a Chinese medicine point of view, is kind of the perspective for people who are dealing with, let's say, wonky cycles, or like in this like real situation, we have somebody who's describing a scenario where she was incorrectly diagnosed with being bipolar because her PMDD, her premenstrual symptoms were just like so severe. And that sounds super, super extreme. And so when there are hormonal imbalances like that, when you have a patient that's coming in and they're complaining of, hormonal imbalance, irregular period, perhaps some of these PMDD symptoms, pain, like any number of things, like what immediately comes to mind for you in terms of, okay, like from a Chinese medicine point of view, I'm starting to look at this like X. Like, can you give us some insight into like what is the perspective on hormones and menstrual health, and what's Chinese medicine's view on that?
Sure. So, from a Chinese medicine perspective, we have involvement of a number of different organ systems. So, we always look at our spleen, our liver, and our kidney. These are kind of like our main three organs related to our menstrual cycle and producing blood and moving the blood in the body. So, if there's any dysfunction in one of those three systems, it can affect the other two and vice versa. So that's where we start. But also from a holistic medicine perspective, that means that we're also addressing mainly stress and diet. So that's where I really start to address the menstrual cycle. And I would say that for any patient that's coming in with, extreme PMS symptoms or irregular menstrual cycles or any sort of related symptoms to their hormonal cycle, we're going to talk about those two things. So we're going to talk about stress. We're going to talk about diet. The reason why we start with stress and diet is because from a hormonal perspective, we need specific building blocks to create the hormones that our body needs to start menstruation at the proper time, to have healthy cycles without major symptoms, and just to have pleasant menstrual cycles. I mean, what an idea. But that is actually how our bodies should be functioning if all three of those organ systems are doing well, if stress is low, and if diet is kind of in that low inflammatory area or grouping. So in addressing stress and diet, like I mentioned, we're really looking at, is the patient getting the proper building blocks that they need to produce the sex hormones? And are they eating enough calories? I mean, that's kind of like something that I've noticed clinically. Most people think that they might be eating enough calories, but after we dive deep into that, most women are actually under eating, and it might not be on purpose. It might not be due to like wanting to lose weight, but maybe just not having enough time to eat or not eating the foods that provide them with enough calories to produce those building blocks for hormones. And then on the other side of things, when we're talking about stress, if our stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, epinephrine are competing with our sex hormones, then it normally leads to quite an imbalance where we can end up with a number of different menstrual related symptoms, trouble conceiving, as well as early menopause or really tough menopausal symptoms to deal with.
Damn, I'm going to come into my like OBGYN classes like full on a pro. I'm just kidding. But that was so eye-opening. I never had thought to ask you when I was in for the session. So I'm curious, like from a nutritional point of view, what do you typically recommend for a woman who is, who I guess it's like so difficult because what are your symptoms? Are you irregular? Are you, struggling with painful symptoms? So kind of on maybe like taking like a macro zoom out, like are there things that you would just in general recommend for all women that are menstruating? And then could you also share like from a nutritional point of view, some recommendations for women who are postmenopausal? Just to kind of like run the gamut for the different kinds of listeners that we have.
So in terms of dietary recommendations, it's really, really specific It's very specific, patient to patient. We'll have different dietary recommendations, especially, today everyone has their own dietary specificities in terms of gluten-free or vegan or vegetarian. So I love to work with patients to really help them to dial in their specific dietary needs. And I suggest that if anyone is looking, to really dial in their specific dietary needs, to work with a professional so that they can help you to achieve that. Because sometimes it's not so obvious. But there is one good piece of advice that will go for all women, whether they're currently menstruating or postmenopausal, premenopausal, kind of wherever you're at in that stage, I would say, as an adult female with female reproductive system. Um, so first thing that I always suggest is minimum of 2,000 calories a day. Now, most women are not eating a minimum of 2,000 calories a day. And the best way to track this, if you don't have a history of eating disorder, is to use the MyFitnessPal app or a different app on the iPhone that can kind of track your macros, but just doing this for about 3 days of average eating. So we're not looking to do this long term. That can develop disordered eating patterns. And again, little disclaimer, if you do already have disordered eating patterns, don't do this method. But 3 days of average eating, it can give us that just baseline knowledge of where you're at to begin with. And then we can compare that. So 2,000 minimum calories a day. And then the other thing to pay attention to is the amount of protein that you're consuming. So sweet spot is about 60 to 70 grams of protein. And again, most women are not consuming that amount. So I would definitely do that little experiment if you feel comfortable with it, and then just kind of check and see where you're at compared to that. And then if you're below that, where can you kind of supplement your diet with different forms of protein, whether that be plant-based protein or animal protein, or just filling up with calories to meet that requirement.
Well, that is a refreshing recommendation. I would say that to have you as a professional reflect back the importance of nourishing yourself adequately and eating enough. So thank you for that. I definitely will look into that because I probably am not eating enough and definitely not enough protein. I was like literally grimacing if you were seeing this on camera when she was describing that. So I wanted to shift gears actually for a moment. You didn't quite mention this as like one of the things that you see in your practice, but I know for a fact that you do see this because I came to you for it. And that is your using, I guess, the practices and principles of Chinese medicine, acupuncture for healthy skin. And I really want to get into kind of the theme and the topic of like, I don't want to say anti-aging because that I really don't like that term. I think we should be pro-aging, or just accepting of what is happening in our bodies. That's really something I personally am trying to work towards because I feel like it's a gift to be able to grow older. Not everybody gets that, and I don't want to feel bad about it. But I do think, healthy skin is something that I strive for personally and that I came to you for, when I was in Boulder. Could you share a little bit more about some of the practices that you leverage in your practice around healthy skin and, like why the tools that you use, what are they, and like how are they so incredibly magical, for lack of a better word?
So a large part of my private acupuncture practice is doing facial rejuvenation, cosmetic acupuncture. So I love that whole area of acupuncture. It's kind of a newer area of acupuncture. And just like you were saying, Kasha, like it's not about anti-aging. I always tell my patients it's about aging gracefully. It's about, supporting our skin to do its important functions, having our skin to be supporting our skin's integrity, which is so important to our immune function and to overall health, but also allowing us to look beautiful, look glowing, and support our skin at every stage of aging and at every stage of age. So the tools that I use to perform those treatments is mainly acupuncture needles that we're inserting into specific areas of the face. Now, these needles, what their actions are, two main actions is they're really lifting the muscles, helping the muscles to stay lifted as we kind of fight the fight against gravity. So as we age, gravity just takes over, moves everything downward. And what the needles do is help the facial muscles to retain that lift, that bounce that we have when we are young, when we're babies. So in addition to the lifting and the plumping that the needles are doing, they're also actually stimulating the fibroblasts. Our fibroblasts are located deep within our skin surface, and the fibroblasts release collagen and elastin to our skin surface. The collagen and elastin fills in fine lines and wrinkles and also adds that bouncy plumpness to our face that we're looking for. So that's kind of like the meat and potatoes of the treatment. That's the main part of the facial acupuncture treatment. And while the patient has the needles in their face, they're laying under the Soluma LED light, which is an amazing tool that uses LED technology at specific wavelengths to target different layers of the skin. And then after the patient relaxes with the needles, they have needles in their face, but they're also going to have needles in different body points to address the whole energy balance and specific points just for that patient to address their needs. So then I return in the room after they've gotten about 20 minutes to relax and just zen out on the table. And then we follow up with my favorite part. I call this the fun part of the treatment because this is the facial massage, facial gua sha, and facial cupping. So it's really like a nice spa relaxing experience, but at the same time, it has so many amazing rewards for the skin in terms of more sculpting and bringing more circulation and blood flow to this area of the skin. So with the needles, with the gua sha tool, with the facial massage and cupping, we are really directing resources, directing blood flow, and directing that qi and energy to the face so that it can heal any cells that are damaged, which can cause signs of aging. And it can also help with other skin conditions. So anything going on the face. I know that we've really been talking about signs of aging and wrinkles and fine lines, but we can really address any kind of skin conditions on the face using this kind of treatment and allowing the blood flow and circulation and resources to be directed to the face.
That was a really good explanation. I wanted to ask you about gua sha. Okay. I feel like gua sha is Instagram's like new favorite activity. Like every influencer and their like grandma are gua shaing at this point. And so I would love to hear from you, like, you know, what is gua sha, first of all? And is there a right way to gua sha, a wrong way to gua sha? Like how, is this something that people can do at home? I see it all the time. So I'd love to get your feedback on that.
So gua sha is one of my favorite tools. I'm so happy that you're asking me this question. But we use it in traditional Chinese medicine for a number of different reasons. It's actually used on other areas of the body as well. So I know right now facial gua sha is like super popular. It's kind of like the only gua sha that people hear of. But in my clinic, I use gua sha on the back. I use gua sha on different muscle groups. And I can use it for a number of different reasons. So we could talk about that later. But in terms of facial gua sha, it is such a great practice because it is so accessible. So I love that it's, really popular on Instagram because it's allowing people to understand this ancient practice from 3,000 years ago. It's kind of giving acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine a little bit of a stage, which is great when it is, culturally respected and, when those cultural practices and lineage and history are also identified. So I do definitely love the specific Instagram accounts that highlight that, and I'll share a few that I really like. Facial gua sha is definitely something that anyone can do at home. I would say following a video from a licensed acupuncturist that has specific training on facial gua sha is really important, just so that you are actually doing strokes that are going to be helpful for your skin and not potentially harmful or in a technique that, is kind of a waste of time. So one of my favorite acupuncturists, her name is Amrit. Her handle is at Six Babe Beauty. I'm sure if you are looking up hashtags for gua sha, you've seen her. But she's amazing because she also really takes the time to describe exactly what muscles you're working on and how that impacts the different goals or aesthetics you're looking for.
Fantastic. And we will absolutely link her in the show notes and any other suggestions that you have. Follow-up question that I wanted to ask you about gua sha. What exactly is happening when you gua sha? I get that it looks aesthetically interesting when you're doing it, but what is happening behind the scenes, and how does that kind of affect your body? And I'm speaking specifically about facial gua sha because I know you mentioned that you gua sha different parts of the body for different things. So what is happening behind the scenes when you're actually doing facial gua sha?
So when you're performing facial gua sha, what you're doing is sculpting the muscles. So there's an element of like the pressure that you're using and the direction of the tool. Most of the time we're going upward or upward and outward. And that lends itself to that lifted appearance that I mentioned before in terms of like going against gravity. We always want to go lifted. So whenever you're applying your facial products as well, like moisturizer, I always suggest using like your hands in an upward motion or using your tool in an upward motion. Um, but not only is the gua sha tool going to be sculpting the muscles, but again, it brings blood and circulation to the area. So in doing so, it's delivering essential nutrients that our body needs. One of the examples that I tell my patients about, and something that I suggest for most of my patients, not every patient this is appropriate for, but I do suggest most of my patients to take collagen internally. But collagen will go wherever it's needed in the body. So if like you have a torn ACL or there, something is healing in like an area of your body, the collagen's most likely going to go there because that's where it's needed. But with gua sha and also with facial acupuncture, we can actually tell the body, okay, direct that collagen, direct those specific resources to this area, to the face, so that we're going to be able to deliver those essential nutrients specifically there.
Finally, I understand the way that this works. So thank you so much for that. And everyone, teaser, you all know what I'm going to be doing tonight. I'm going to be building up that collagen, a little bit of gua sha, lots of self-care. So speaking of self-care, Layne, honestly, I could speak to you for hours, but I know that that is not possible. Unfortunately, you have patients you need to get to, your day-to-day. So I wanted to bring us back home with a question that is actually inspired by one of my professors. And that is, as you know, the theme of this podcast is nourish, and it's all about integrating both sides of our yin and yang. And I would love to hear from you. How are you doing that? Like when you think about that integration, that balance, what does that look like in your real life?
I love that question because I had an experience in the past year where I was not doing that very well. And that allowed me to really hone in on those skills myself. And I feel like I'm in a much better place now in terms of really incorporating like rest and slowness and introspection with the action and movement and, forward mindset. So it was in September. I was about a year and a half into being a practitioner and treating patients. I see about 40 patients a week on an average week. And at that time, so it was about a year and a half of seeing 40 patients a week nonstop throughout the pandemic. And at that time, I was so burnt out. I noticed it in myself. I was just exhausted. I was not looking forward to answering patient emails. I was not looking forward to going to work. I was not looking forward to doing all these things that I know deep down are so fulfilling to me and light me up. That was like the first kind of sign that something was off. I was like, this is not right. I should be so excited every morning, as I normally am, to go into the office and to treat my patients. So it was at that time that I was like, okay, I need to reevaluate stuff. I need to take an inventory and see what's going on. So since then, I've incorporated a lot of changes. Not only have I kind of cut down on my patient load, in general. So now I see like about 35 patients a week. It's not a major difference because actually, like in addressing burnout and addressing this, it's not even about the workload necessarily. It can also be about more supportive practices on the other side. And that was really where I was lacking. It wasn't that my workload was, overwhelming or too demanding. It was really just that I wasn't supporting my body in the way that I needed to do that role. So now I definitely am prioritizing more rest. And by rest, I actually just mean like chilling out. So I always tell my patients rest doesn't have to be like sleeping. Rest can be watching Netflix, as long as you're not watching something super stressful. So I always remind myself and remind patients to like be mindful of the content. But rest can be watching Netflix. For me, it can be walking my dogs. For me, it can be doing my nighttime meditation. It can also be me doing my facial massage with my legs up the wall in the evening. But really staying rooted in these practices and making them part of my daily routine. I always refer to these tools, these like stress management tools or rest and relaxation tools, as part of my toolbox. And at certain times of my life, I need X amount of tools. And then at other times, I might need like 2 times that amount of tools. So it's always a great thing to like be cultivating these tools daily so that you feel comfortable with them and you can just pull them out when you need them.
I love that description because you just kind of really tangibly explained how you're kind of measuring things like almost like a balance, like more tools, less tools, like adjusting. And that's just such a beautiful way to describe, how you approach your life holistically. So thank you for that. All right, we could keep going forever, but I know you have to go see patients. As you just described, you have a lot of them and you want to make sure that you feel balanced as well. So I obviously will link all of this, but I want to know from you, what can people come to you with and where can they find you?
So Kasha, if you guys are interested and you want to find me, you can see me in person. I live in Colorado. I practice out of an office in Northwest Denver. It's called Onyxacu and Integrative Health. And then I also practice out of an office in Boulder called Ama Luna Wellness. And then I do also offer telemedicine services. So for patients all over the United States, you can visit my website, www.onyxacu.com, and you can find information about my telemedicine services that I offer. That's all over the computer, and you can access me from anywhere. I also do have an Instagram page. My Instagram handle is @Onyxacu, always sharing really cool updates there. I love to write and share some interesting TCM tips, traditional Chinese medicine, diet, acupuncture, lifestyle, as well as sharing pictures of my dogs. So if you want to see my doggies, you can see them there too.
I can vouch her dogs are very cute and the content is very educational. So this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Layne. Thank you for really digging into all of these like highly technical questions. I feel like I might have just quizzed you on your entire fundamentals class, which as somebody who's going through that can say that that's probably not fun, but you're just obviously a guru of your craft. And I just really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your knowledge with us all. Thank you so much.
Kasha, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm so excited for everyone to hear it. And I look forward to engaging with you more and with your listeners.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Nourish. If you heard anything on today's episode that really resonated with you, feel free to share it with your friends, your family members, or anyone who you think might be able to benefit from the conversation. Second, I am so eager to hear from all of you. If you have a moment and you'd like to, I'd so appreciate an honest review of Nourish. Of course, I love the 5-star reviews and it helps this podcast grow, but above anything else, I appreciate honesty. I promise I read each and every review myself and I work to integrate your feedback into future episodes. Finally, if you want to connect with any of the speakers, please check out the show notes for direct links to websites plus social media. And if you want to learn more about holistic counseling or traditional Chinese medicine and the work that I do, please head over to my website at www.mirawellness.co or my Instagram at Mira_wellness_co to connect. Thanks again for being a listener and see you next week.